How are you, Taylor?
Oh, Maria, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me today.
Listen, it's a pleasure. We've spoken many times, and apart from the fact that I love your voice and your accent, you always
Ah,
give us so much value. And the first thing you said to me, just as I was about to press record, or the last thing you said as I was about to press record, you said, "I want to give value." So, I mean, why wouldn't I have you on the show?
thanks. We're just thrilled to be here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
So today is all about CRM, and you are an expert in CRM. But tell me the story behind your business, SpeakerFlow, and the inspiration for creating it before we dive into unpicking the details.
Yeah, definitely. So it really started once myself and my business partner kind of put our heads together. Austin had come from the software space, which was a little helpful, helping speakers, and I came from the marketing space. And a company had asked, "Well, hey, could you guys market for speakers, coaches, consultants? That kind of expert category." And we said, why? Sure, why not? What could go wrong? And what's funny about marketing is it's a much like any business system, really, it's a very methodical process. There's a reason why marketing agencies exist, is they're just repeating a process across a bunch of different verticals, and it's pretty easy to, so to speak, to turn the digital faucet on. But the issue with an agency a lot of the time is their job ends when the lead is generated, because the whole goal is to generate leads. That means it's up to the business owner or the team of the business to take that lead and nurture it with other marketing mechanisms like email marketing or manual outreach, and eventually make the close. So what happened is we would turn this digital faucet on, and all of these leads would just fall through the cracks for this kind of category: speakers, coaches, consultants, and so on. And so we said, well, what is going on here? And we did some digging, and long story short is they didn't really have the systems to be able to handle very robust marketing in the first place. Didn't even have the systems to nurture people, to get them to close, didn't really understand the process of taking leads and creating opportunities and getting them to say yes. And so we ended up doing some training around this just to see if we could help improve these people's businesses. And for a few of them, it worked because they took our strategies and the systems we had set up, and they were actually seeing results from it. But we started understanding a little bit more about why speakers, coaches, consultants don't have these robust systems in place. Then it's largely because we're small teams. I mean, I don't know about all the listeners here on the show, but often we're working by ourselves, or we might have a VA of sorts, a contractor. It's pretty rare that we come across anybody with W-2 or payroll staff employees, especially full-time employees. And so they don't have the infrastructure necessarily to build these complex systems and to sell and to do all the things they're already doing. And when you go and buy software from other companies, especially as you're kind of piecing together your different business systems, before you know it, you end up paying for like 40 different applications, and you're maybe using 1% of each one of them, and you're paying a small mortgage for all of them. And you want to be more efficient, so you want to get another tool, but that tool costs more money, but you're not getting any more money from the tools you already have. And so what happens is people don't naturally equate value to having these systems in place. And it's largely because the way they're set up is very time consuming. They're not customized to our business model. We thought, well, before people can really even make use of structured marketing and sales processes and operating their business, we got to set the foundation up. And so many of us rely on referrals for our business. And that's a beautiful thing because it means we do a really good job. But what happens when a pandemic hits? The referrals dry up. There's no active revenue generation in the business. We don't have our own predictable way of generating our own revenue. And before we can even get to that point, we need the systems in place and then a process to be able to follow that we can repeat before we're going to have any of that. And I talk to speakers all the time, and the number one thing I hear, and Maria, I'm pretty sure you hear this a lot too, but I just want to stay in my zone of genius. Well, I do too, as a business owner, don't we all, right? Like, we started a business to create freedom for our lives, to have an impact for the people we want to serve. And there are certain things that, Maria, you love doing in your business that I would hate doing. And there are things I love doing in my business that you would hate doing. And that's kind of the beautiful way of business. We each get to pick and choose what we want to do. Most people, though, don't want to put their heads into systems because it's in the weeds, it's complicated, it's hard to figure out, and it's not in that creative zone that we like to be in. So we figured, well, if we could eliminate that step of having to be in the weeds with systems and customizing your own stuff and just give people a way of working, a process to follow with systems, they're going to see more results with their business. And then we can finally elevate them to that point in their business where they can be the creative genius they want to be because they have systems working for them, potentially employees working for them, contractors who know what they're doing because they have a system to follow. And this is one of the biggest issues we see with speakers who want to hire. It's just no standardized anything. So that contractor, that VA just doesn't know what to do. And so systems really solve that problem of having a repeatable process, knowing where your business is coming from, and eventually alleviating yourself out of the minutia. That's kind of why we started SpeakerFlow.
Wowzers, there was so much fantastic knowledge there that you shared. I've written half a page of notes. Brilliant. So I love systems and processes because that's my background. I used to be a management consultant in systems, but not the tech stuff. It's actually the behaviors, which I know is something you're passionate about. It's about getting people to behave in a certain way around the technology. So that's fascinating. You talked about leads. I think we probably ought to clarify for some people what a lead actually is, because there are people out there who don't even know what a lead is. Could you give us your definition?
Yeah, for sure. And man, it just doesn't help that there's so much other language around,
There is.
prospects and leads. And if you get into the HubSpot world, we're talking marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads. Like it goes on into oblivion, it seems like, right? You have your subscribers, and are those leads, or are those just subscribers? Like, how does that all work in the grand scheme of things? Now, the way I like to think about pretty much everything in systems is we need to start with almost like a kindergarten level of understanding. And then once we've got that down, we can get more granular and more segmented with our leads because we understand more. We have to build on that. We don't want to use all this fancy language right away because we don't really know the definitions to everything. And so what we define a lead as, this is going to be the kindergarten level of understanding what a lead is. This is anything that came in inbound. So let's say you have an audience survey and they said they wanted to hear more from you. As a subscriber, we're going to call that a lead. This is a prospect as well. Somebody you maybe found online, maybe on LinkedIn or Google, they have an event and you want to start reaching out to them. It's also a lead. Basically, a lead is anybody you believe you could do business with, but you haven't done business with them yet, nor do you have a real relationship with them. It's kind of like being a detective, if you will. You have a bunch of leads for a case that you're trying to solve. A few of those leads are going to turn into opportunities of who that real person is. And then you're going to have the person who it actually is. And so leads are really just, if we're going to use a broad term, it's anybody inbound or anybody outbound that you're prospecting that you believe you could do business with, but you haven't yet.
So you would use the term lead and prospect interchangeably.
Exactly, for the kindergarten level understanding. Now, the difference between a prospect and, let's say, a subscriber or something is normally prospect is the language for outbound versus somebody that's inbound. So now if we want to elevate our understanding to maybe the high school level, then prospects are going to be your outbound leads, subscribers and discovery calls and so on that are booked, those are going to be inbound leads. And so you can kind of get more granular in your segmentation of the different types of leads that you have. And that goes down further, of course, a few other layers if we want to get to that point. But for 99% of people, if we just know that leads are people we haven't done business with, that we could do business with, and we just leave that as the definition, you can get incredibly, incredibly far, $1 million plus business, just having that single definition and moving leads into what we call opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. You mentioned also in the first part of your response, you talked about speakers not having teams and often being on their own or having a VA. And I think that's part of the reason why actually they should have the right software and systems set up now, because as you said, then people know what to do when you bring them in. But also if you're on your own, you're time strapped, you're time poor. So on the one hand, it takes you time to set up your CRM, but you will save so much time, won't you? And you'll save a lot of mistakes. And I know before I had a CRM, which was a very long time ago, because I've used CRMs for years now, I would be looking for my last communication with somebody to pick it up. Whereas in your CRM, the advantage is it's there. It's literally in front of you, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's the thing we talk about all the time. One of the biggest objections we hear to getting systems set up is, well, I have to invest all this time in learning it and doing data entry and managing it. Well, yeah, but how much time are you losing because you have to resort to 15 different things when you're trying to write up a contract or you're trying to find that email from God only knows when from this prospect? Like, it's a trade-off, really. I like to think of it as a grid. You're either going to give up the time because you're not organized, you're going to give up the time to set your systems up, and then what's going to happen is you're going to have compound interest, if you will, on your time back the more you use your CRM, because you're going to be able to sell more, you're going to be able to serve better, you're going to be able to reach out to people faster, and then find all of those communications. So people are losing the time either in setting up the system and getting it rolling, or they're losing way more time just manually trying to find all the information they're looking for at any given time.
But worse still is that things fall through the holes.
That's right.
I know so many speakers, and I'm astounded, who don't track the inquiries that they have that they lost, that didn't
Yeah.
close for whatever reason. And if you've got a CRM system, you track it and you'd go back and say, well, okay, I didn't get it this year, but when you know when to go back, you have an alert to tell you to go back. It's just it's like your assistant, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, certainly. I mean, with the technology we have these days, most CRMs have AI involved, and it'll say something like, Maria, you haven't followed up with these 14 opportunities in the last 21 days. What's going on here? Like, it can't get better than that, And when we have all of our things in one place, we're not going to let anything slip through the cracks. In fact, one of the processes that we teach is a business development process. So what that means is you're taking leads, following up with them until they say, hey, I'm interested. Let's have a conversation. That's called business development. That's when a lead turns into an opportunity. So a process that we teach, it's called watertight selling. And it's this kind of idea, after having gone through many years of frustration myself, that there's no magic wand or silver bullet strategy that you're going to find online or through a podcast or through a video that's going to transform the way you sell. The only thing that's going to transform the way you sell and how to make more money is by iterating on your own process. And in order to be watertight, you can't let anything slip through the cracks. And what a lot of times happens is people will have a bunch of holes, let's call it, in their pipeline, and things are slipping through, and they're trying to tack on different strategies and different things to fix that pipeline, but they're not solving the root issue, which is that everything is falling out far before you even get to that strategy in the first place. And so this idea of like being watertight is just what you said. We can't let anything slip through the cracks. And if we're iterating on our own process instead, naturally, we're just going to get better at moving revenue through our business.
Love that. Love that. I love a bit of
Yeah.
revenue.
Yeah.
So in an ideal world, then, how should a CRM really function in a speaker's business?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So let's talk about just speaking as a whole, right? Like, speaking is often one delivery mechanism that many of us have. So the first thing that your CRM must do is keep track of every revenue stream. We run pretty complex businesses. We sell B2C, we sell B2B products and very expensive services a lot of the time. So the first thing to understand is that your CRM needs to keep track of all of those revenue streams so that at the end of the year, you can say, wow, I made this much money from this much money from this much money from this, and you can create the business that you want. And so I'm going to back up just one step. And it really all starts with, what is the business that you want to have? Because your CRM is going to be able to facilitate that business you want to have, because it's going to give you that data. And then the other thing to understand about having a CRM is that in order to make it not a glorified spreadsheet, because this is also what happens, I'm sure there's plenty of listeners like just resonating with this right now, but like we just end up putting address information in and the email address occasionally, and like that's it. We're just storing contact information. And of course, a CRM isn't going to feel valuable when all we're doing is data entry and there's no workflow behind it. So every CRM must have a workflow, meaning there's a structured way that you handle your leads to get them to say, yes, I'd love to have a conversation. And once you have that conversation, there's a workflow to get them to say, yes, I'd love to buy from you. And the idea of using the CRM in a speaker's business is that everything should be task centric. I know a lot of people get kind of overwhelmed because if you have a substantial database or you've been in the business for a while, you're going to have 10,000 plus contacts or leads or opportunities with time. And you're just kind of looking at this giant list of contacts in your CRM you don't really know what to do with. And so ideally, every single opportunity you have in your CRM has a follow-up task. Any lead you're actively nurturing that you haven't ruled off yet has a follow-up task. And so long as those things are true, the only thing you need to do every day is go into your activities, see which tasks are due, get those knocked out, set follow-up tasks, and check in the next day. And so long as you're being task-centric in your approach to using the CRM, you're going to get value out of it because now there's a workflow involved with using it rather than just adding in data for the sake of having data somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do, and it is useful as long as you keep on top of it, of course. Otherwise, you end up getting a lot of activities. It's like,
That's
oh,
right.
Maria, you haven't done these, and they're late, and So I caught up to date today because I knew I was talking to you, so I'm up to
Yeah,
date.
certainly. And you bring up a good point. Like overwhelm can be real when you're first getting started. You know, some people get really excited about the idea of having a CRM and they start adding a bunch of tasks and maybe they're engaging in a new like sales process. And so they're trying to figure out their bandwidth. So the best advice I can give to limit overwhelm is to create sacred space in your calendar to manage your tasks in the CRM and then just have it open throughout the day so you can move things as you're working if needed. If you create that sacred space, no more than a half hour to an hour a day. I do mine generally in the morning and schedule my emails out at the best time to, send an email to people, but it's still generally in the morning before all of my meetings get started. If you make that sacred space and you're truly committed to that, then generally you're going to be able to stay on top of it. But we always have to assess your bandwidth. We don't want to do too much. If you find those tasks really piling up, dial it back a little bit, still keeping that hour a day so that we're actually making progress in the business.
Absolutely. And of course, if you're out speaking every single day or on Zoom speaking every single day, you do need to find that time and you do need to block
Mhm.
it out. And I've spoken to other speakers who have CRMs, and they do it first thing before they look at anything else. They start in their
Right.
CRM. And what I love about a CRM, of course, is that yes, you can schedule when your emails are going to go out. So you can do it when I'm better first thing in the morning. So you can write your great email and think, well, actually, I don't want it to go out then because I know the time zone's not right, or I want them to think I've spent a lot more time on this when really actually I got it straight away. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
yeah, for sure. And so you can schedule it. But then what's also wonderful is you can have templates as
Mhm.
well to help you and make things faster. And you can send more than one email to the same person, but to different people with, and there's so much you can do. I love CRMs. Love it, love it, love it. Sorry, I'm going to get overexcited. So why are people underutilizing their CRMs when they do have them? Is it because they're not scheduling that time? And why aren't they using them more successfully, would you say?
Yeah, so I think it all kind of starts with behavior. Like, let's just acknowledge the fact when we don't see value in something. Let's take working out. We all have sometimes a New Year's resolution to get healthier, let's say. So we start working out the first couple weeks and we're not seeing any progress. And so we say, "Dang, well, that burger sounds pretty good. So I'm just going to go eat that instead because I haven't seen any progress. We're not getting value, immediate gratification out of the work that we're putting into it." And this often happens with CRMs. Like there's a ramp up period to using a CRM and establishing habits and building that little snowball effect that generally happens when you're using a system like this. And so what happens for most people is we too quickly decide this isn't valuable. This is a waste of my time. I'm not going to do it. And so when that mindset kind of sits in, especially this is a waste of my time, since our time as experts is so valuable, we're naturally not going to use it. So the first thing that needs to happen is we need to shift our mindset basically to saying this is worth my time, because if you want to generate revenue in your business in a predictable way, that should have the highest priority, arguably even over client delivery. And that's a different conversation. But we first need to prioritize that value. We need to say this is valuable. This is worth my time. Past that point, the biggest issue that I generally find and why people aren't equating value to the CRM is kind of what we talked about a little bit ago, where there isn't a workflow established to the CRM. It's just collecting data and collecting dust, and that's it. And we're not seeing the value from it because we're not working inside of it. It's kind of like swinging a hammer upside down. So if you decide to swing a hammer and you're holding it upside down, is it really going to be valuable to getting that nail in place? Probably not. And you're going to find another way to do it. Is it going to be the right way? No. When really all you needed to do is flip the hammer around and use the right side of it. And that's what we need to teach people, is how to use the thing in the right way so that it actually drives the results forward.
Fantastic. So getting the software is only part of the solution, isn't it?
It's part of the
And
journey. Yeah.
there's so many CRMs out there. There's loads of them,
Yeah.
and some of them are big famous names. But is it just about choosing the tech? What do you
Oh,
need to
no.
consider?
Yeah, I know the tech. I mean, they all basically do the same thing. They're going to keep track of leads and contacts, your emails, your notes, your tasks, your pipeline. Like all of them fundamentally are going to do the exact same thing. When you're choosing a CRM, the biggest thing is to look for an organization that can work with you, especially if you're just starting out and you're trying to understand how to use one. I think one of the biggest hangups that people have in choosing the technology is we're kind of looking for people who can guide us because we might not know how to use it. But the challenge with larger CRM companies is that they have to cater to the entire mass market. So when you reach out to support, maybe you want to keep track, maybe you have a question. How do I keep track of speaking versus coaching versus consulting? How do I set my CRM up to do that? Well, the support team at that large organization might not have any ideas for you because it's not really a technical problem. It's a business strategy problem. And so what happens a lot of the time when you're looking for CRM support or any really system support, there's not really any strategy to back what you're doing with it. So I think when you're looking for a company to, obviously buy a CRM from, the first is to make sure that they can provide some of that strategy for you, especially if you're feeling like you need it, aside from just general technology support. And I think there are some tools, of course, that are easier to use than others. I think depending on who you are, you might have a certain affinity to how one is designed over another, which is totally fine. That's normal. But of course, aside from the other standard things like making sure it fits in your budget and it's extensible and so on, that's really what we want to look for. And many speakers, we have other systems that we need, learning management systems and invoicing and social media, and the list kind of goes on. So whatever CRM you choose, you want to make sure it's very extensible, meaning it can be integrated into other things, because we believe that the CRM needs to be the hub to the entire business. So if you're in a platform that doesn't easily integrate with other things to make it that hub, then it's really not going to perform for you in the long haul.
No, I've been nodding my head vigorously, which obviously no one can hear on a podcast, because you're absolutely right. So we when we ran our speaker bureau, worked with one of the big CRM companies, and not only is there frustration that they just have no understanding. If you're a small, for them, we were a smaller organization. In the speaker bureau world, we weren't that small, but for them, we were quite small. And so, they didn't understand us. And also the staff turnover, you never had the same person looking after you for more than 6 months. So once you'd educated them about your business and they were able, in a position to help you, they were gone, nowhere to be seen. I don't know where these people go to. Absolutely crazy. So totally get it. And I think that's so important, that support, because there's the training often of how to use it, but also making it applicable to the speaking world, which is a totally unusual business. So I think you've got something very special there in what you do, that you can really help speakers in that respect. That's really excellent.
No, thanks. Yeah, I mean, one thing that I just want to highlight here is like, SpeakerFlow started with the strategy. We never had really, when we first started this whole thing, an inclination to start a CRM. Like what we were trying to do is implement business systems, regardless of the tech you needed. If you were using Salesforce, great, we can work with that. We'll build some systems into it. If it's HubSpot, awesome, not a problem. Pipedrive, that's fine. Our CRM came out of dire need, though, because we had to reinvent our own strategies over and over again about how these got deployed into different CRMs that are out there. So I want to communicate to everybody that's listening here, you can do everything we're talking about today on any system under the sun. Like we've been there and we've done that. But it's this strategy component about how you actually organize the business to see a result that's usually the biggest hang up for people using CRMs. How do you actually make it work for you?
And actually, the whole strategy piece is often the piece that's missing anyway in the first place, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, and that's where it all starts, right?
It absolutely, and that's amazing. I was talking about that only today, so you must have been listening in. You must have a camera in my office somewhere.
I hope not.
Yeah, me too. So how can speakers get the biggest ROI from using CRM? I mean, that's a huge question. So I don't even know if it's a fair one to ask you, really.
No, it is. It's totally fair. So let's talk about what ROI really means, because often it's not so much the monthly fee that people are too concerned about. You might pay $50 a month, $100 a month, but let's think about that in terms of gigs. Even if you're paying $100 a month for your system, that's $1,200 a year. One gig, let's say if you're pricing fairly, $5,000 to $10,000, ROI should be there for the fee that you're paying. What people generally mean, though, by ROI is their time investment, because everyone is worried about the time that they're spending. And I like to think about time very much like money. We have two resources in our life in order to create more resources. We either have time that we have to give up, or we have money that we need to give up and pay other people to do things, let's say, or hire things out. And so generally we want to balance those two things really well. And the issue is that most people want to save as much time as possible because, let's face it, we only have so much time on this earth. It's way more valuable than money for most. And so the thing that we have to understand is that, much like money, when you're investing that money, there's a delay in its return. And it generally takes time for it to compound. If you're familiar with investment strategies, right, you're going to put money in and you're going to keep doing that for a while until it starts to compound and compound more. And it kind of builds this snowball effect. And time is the exact same thing. When you start using a CRM, we have to be okay with putting the time in regularly. That's why we talked about that sacred space earlier. And then with about 90 days or so is when we generally see the snowball kick in, so long as they're diligent and following up and we start to see that value. And then past that point, it continues to build and build and build. But we have to be committed to the process of making this thing work for us. Just kind of tying back to our workout example, if my goal is to lose weight, I need to be committed to that process for a really decent amount of time before I really start seeing the results. And as we all know, that kind of ebbs and flows. So a lot of this kind of takes grit. It takes an understanding that, hey, you know what, although I'm putting a little bit of time in right now, I know I'm going to get the return out of it. And so in order for a CRM to really have that ROI, we need to invest that time up front so that it saves us that time later. And so what happens usually when we see somebody kind of go through the transformation of not having the habits to using a CRM to using it, left and right, is that when they first started out, their motivation is pain. They need a CRM because they're not selling enough, or they're letting things slip through the cracks. And so they're motivated to try and fix that. But then there's that delay for a little while where you start using it and you're not really sure if it's still solving that problem. But eventually that motivation, about the 90-day mark, comes from momentum. So eventually, rather than being motivated by pain and it not working for us, or the way we're currently doing things not working for us, we get motivated by momentum because we actually see some of the results that are happening. And of course, with momentum, we're going to continue to perform more and continue to get that ROI out of it. So my biggest advice to people to get that ROI is to stick with the process, because you will switch from pain to momentum as far as your motivation is concerned.
Excellent. And 90 days actually is a pretty reasonable time frame to
Yeah.
have a change in your business. It's not a huge time frame, and it's about right, especially in the speaking world. It does take time for people to make decisions. And in reality, Taylor, speakers don't need to have a huge number of bookings for them to make a really decent living.
No.
Especially if they're charging, as you said, the appropriate level of fees. So although the CRM is really helpful and keeps you focused, it doesn't have to have thousands and thousands of contacts in it.
No.
You actually don't need that much. But the ones that you have, you need to make sure that you go back to them when you said you were going to go back to them, that you follow up. And on that follow-up point, because you said the ones that are diligent on follow-up, do you have any advice on sort of how often you should contact somebody who you think might be interested? Do you have a time scale, or do you ask them to say, this is when you should come back to me?
Oh, this is a great question. It's a very loaded one too. So to
I
answer
know.
your first question, like, is there a cadence, or do you ask them? It's a little bit of both. But the first point is we have to even get in touch with them, especially if they're a new contact, right? So before we can even ask, we still got to have a conversation with them. One thing I want to highlight, though, is kind of to your point earlier, just a moment ago, about how we don't need thousands and thousands of people. It's much more about quality more than it is about quantity. And so one thing that we can do immediately that will add about a 25% more revenue in all of your businesses, guaranteed, is every single client that you've won, so every event that you've had, set a follow-up task that's recurring every 90 days. Not every 6 months when their event is handled, not like every year, because that's when their next event is, every 90 days. And just add value, connect with that person, stay top of mind. You already had a relationship with them. This is where so many people go wrong, is they say their past client exercise. You know what I'm talking about, Maria, where people are like, oh, you need to reach out to your past clients to generate business. I don't know how often I hear this in masterminds. Let's imagine you buy something from a person. Let's say SpeakerFlow. Let's say you go buy our CRM. After we've done serving you, do you feel like you would have been served if we stopped reaching out to you at that point and we cut off our relationship and we just never touched base with you again? You would feel like we've done you a disservice. And that's much like the clients that you're working with. Most people who are hiring speakers have larger problems to be solved. It's the whole reason why they brought you in the first place. And so by not following up with them regularly after they've bought on that 90-day schedule, we're not even giving them the opportunity to continue working with us, which in my opinion is unfair if you believe you're providing a lot of value to people. So if you're talking about clients, every 90 days, once you've won a deal, just follow up, touch base, provide some value, and you're going to generate more business just because you're top of mind. Now, if we're talking about new contacts, like leads, for example, what's the appropriate timeline that we reach out, and how long should we be doing that? It kind of depends on when you start reaching out and when their event is or when their decision window is and what actually you're selling. But here are some blanket statement rule of thumbs that we found to be true. And I can share a guide with your audience if you'd like, Maria. I'll just give you the PDF. It's called Watertight Selling, conveniently. Now, on average, it takes 7 to 12 touch points to get in touch with somebody. 7 to 12. And what do you think has happened with the pandemic? It has heightened that. It has made it way closer to 12 than it is 7. So if you're reaching out to somebody new and they don't know who you are, you kind of barely know what's going on in their world, it's going to take more or less 7 to 12 touch points before they're going to feel comfortable, and maybe that they have enough trust with you to say, okay, I'm interested in learning more. So that's the first thing we have to understand. Most people stop their follow-up after touch point 2 or 3 because they don't want to be salesy. And I totally agree. Like, if you don't want to be salesy, you're naturally not going to be salesy. But we need to provide value, and we still need to get to that 7 to 12 touch point range. So what do I mean by a touch point? I mean an email, a phone call, a LinkedIn message, even a social interaction like commenting or liking on a post. All of those things are good touch points. Now, those 7 to 12 generally are going to happen a little bit more quickly up front. So maybe your first 4 or 5 touch points are happening maybe every 4 or 5 business days, but then you're going to space that out a little bit. So what we find is if somebody goes through the full 14 touch follow-up, which we generally recommend because 14 touch points is larger than 12. So we're really banking on the fact that this is going to work. What'll end up happening then, hold on, you're going to have to cut this, Maria. I'm sorry. I just lost my train of thought.
Okay.
There we go. Yes, sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you want to, how do you want to do that?
Okay.
So that if we make it to those final 14 touch points, we know that we can cut that lead off because we haven't reached them. And so if we're following that process of 14 touch points, it generally takes about 90 to 120 days to complete that outreach process. So we generally recommend, if you can't get in touch with them and ask them what cadence you want to follow up on, it's generally going to take about 90 days again of nurturing before they're going to move on to the next process, which is why bureaus recommend this. We recommend this. You want to be kind of in their buying window about 3 to 4 months before their event, if possible. Now that's shortened a little bit with virtual, but that's why that rule of thumb has always existed, is because it takes about 90 to 120 days to get people to express enough interest. And that means we need to catch them before their event actually happens.
Absolutely. It has shortened significantly, and I think it's probably going to stay a bit shorter, isn't it, for some time to come? So you've got to sort of be really on it. Okay, cool. Keeping it simple, what's the 3-step process for scaling your speaking business? I love asking you the big questions.
3-step process for scaling your speaking business. Yes. So we define scaling a business in terms of really 3 stages. The first is that we need to make enough money predictably ourselves. And so that doesn't mean like hitting all of your revenue goals in order to scale. Like, let's not limit your ability to scale because you're not making as much money as you want to make at the moment. Of course, you got to cover the bills, cover your expenses, make sure you have some profit in your business. What I mean by predictable is, let's say you start on this lead generation process, this business development process. And even if you're spending, let's say, only a half hour a day, but that half hour a day is yielding you maybe 4 new meetings every single month with qualified decision makers, and maybe 1 or 2 paid gigs as a result of that. Well, that half hour a day, think about hiring somebody full-time to manage this, can be translated very easily into success because that's predictable. You're generating business. So it doesn't need to be all of the business you want. It just needs to be predictable. And then you can decide whether or not you want to maintain it, or if you want to hire somebody to help you maintain it. Now, I would always recommend then, after you've made some predictability in how you generate your own revenue, this, mind you, doesn't come from referrals. Referrals aren't predictable. They're kind of lucky. So what I'm saying by predictable in stage 1 is we first have to learn how to make ourselves enough money actively ourselves. Once we understand that process, we can move on to stage 2, which is hiring people to help alleviate that minutia. And I would encourage you to consider hiring somebody, even if it's a contractor, for example, to manage that business development process that you've learned how to do, where you're taking leads and turning them into meetings. Now, as the speaker or the expert, you're never going to be fully removed from the sales process because your decision makers want to interact with you. They want to know you before they get on stage, and that's perfectly fine. But you can still get somebody to book the meeting with you prior to that, which will alleviate an incredible amount of time, and you'll book so many more meetings as a result of it. And honestly, Maria, like every time I talk to a speaker, I say, well, once you have somebody in a call, what's your ability like to close them? And 99% of the time, they're like, all I need is getting them on the phone. If I can get them on the phone, I'm going to close them. So great, let's just get somebody to get people on the phone for you so you don't have to worry about that anymore. And that's phase 2, hiring people to help you manage this process. And then what you're going to do in phase 3 is reinvest those extra dollars you're making now because you've got a business development person or a contractor, even, VAs, if that's working for you. But stage 3 is reinvesting that profit, one, into paying yourself so you feel like it's helping you and you're not resentful of your business, but furthermore, back into marketing efforts. What a lot of people do is they'll say, I'm going to focus on social media and I want to look in paid advertising. Like we're looking for these magic wands that are just going to generate us business. Social media isn't going to do it. Paid ads, you're going to need a ton of money to make it work for you over time. You're going to need specialized teams. And most of us don't come from a marketing expertise background. But most of us can sell ourselves, especially if we try. So stage 1, learn how to sell yourself. Stage 2, teach someone else how to sell yourself. And stage 3, reinvest that money back into things you're not good at, like maybe email marketing or paid ads or social media management and all of the other things that can still generate more business. And what happens in stage 3 is if you invest those dollars wisely, especially into more passive marketing streams and take the time to nurture that, your need to find more leads manually goes down. So even though you're still being active and taking those leads and nurturing them, you don't have to find them manually anymore because you've attracted them through your inbound vehicle. So if we focus on those 3 stages, we build our own revenue streams first and then build up to the point where we can reinvest in marketing. That's when you're really going to create a scalable engine.
That is fabulous. I mean, that was a very difficult question, and you've given me a masterclass answer. I love that. And what I also love is the fact that you're saying you need to do the selling first before you bring somebody else to do it, which it is. I think you do absolutely, absolutely. So, I didn't ask you where everybody can get the watertight selling PDF. How are we going to share that? Is there a link that you can share, or should I send them to our website?
Certainly. So I'll just give you the PDF so you can put that on your website if you'd like. But we also have like 30 other guides, including watertight selling, at speakerflow.com/resources. So if you go there, it'll be all of our guides and you can get more access to all of that stuff too. But I'll certainly share the watertight selling guide with you after we're done here.
Lovely. So I will put a link as well in the notes to your website so that people can grab those resources. That is awesome. And if they also want to reach out to you, is that the best place to come? Is it your website?
Yeah, or just shoot me an email, Taylor with 2 R's, Taylorr @speakerflow.com, and I'll respond to all of you personally.
That's lovely. So what is your final thought that you would like to leave us with before we say goodbye to everybody with regards to CRMs?
Yes. My final thought is if you're going on the path of the CRM, just remember that compound interest. Put in the time initially, 90 days, get that strategy in place and be committed yourself to making this thing work for you. If you're committed and your head's on straight and you've got the right mindset, there is no doubt that using one is actually going to produce a result in your business. It's just don't start something without being incredibly committed to it. And I guarantee you it'll pay off.
I love that. That is brilliant. So all that remains is for me to say thank you so much for being my guest, Taylor. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Yeah, it was so fun, Maria. It's always a pleasure. Thank you again for having me.
You've given excellent value, and I want to thank everybody for listening to Speaking Business Podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave a rating on Apple Podcasts, tell your friends, share it. Until next time, I have been Maria Franzoni, and Taylorr Payne has been Taylorr Payne. Thank you and goodbye.